supervised 5 departments of the CBN, including reserve management, banking and payment systems, currency operations, and so forth. At what point did the depletion of our reserves start? And did anybody call attention to it?
First, before I answer the question, I want to explain to you how reserves are built up and how reserves are depleted. Largely, our forex revenue is earned from 2-3 main sources. One, from the royalty that we get on the export of crude oil, from the petroleum profit tax, and other forex-related income. This come into central bank. In addition to that, there can also be inflow of foreign direct investment or portfolio funds. In other words, an international investor is coming into the country with $10 million. They want to do business with Nigeria. They surrender the dollar, and then, of course, Naira is given to them, and so on and so forth. Now, when all of this happens, the reserve is built up. Now, the opposite can also happen. You and I want to travel. We need some money to buy things. Well, you go to your bureau de change. That, of course, means that central bank will release money, i.e. through bureau de change or through banks for invisible transactions. There are also letters of credit for importation of goods and services. All of that is a depletion of the reserve. So it is the interplay of these two, savings and withdrawal of foreign exchange, that then the balancing effect is whether or not you are doing reserve accretion or reserve depletion. So it is not just the activity of government that leads to increase in reserve or decrease in reserve. It is the economic activity as a whole. However, central bank's role is to keep an eye on those reserves in determining what the exchange rate will be. When reserve is falling at a very fast level, it is the central bank duty to find out whether or not Naira should be depreciated or whether it should appreciate, depending again on so many other things. I mean, these are not the only reason. If, of course, the reason for the depletion is because there's too much Naira, that's when central bank occasionally comes up in the monetary policy by mopping up Naira so that too much Naira will not chase too few dollars. Now, when all of that happens, you then find out that it's like juggling 3, 4, 5, 6 balls with your two hands. It's very, very difficult. It's delicate balancing. On the one hand, you're balancing reserve level. On the other hand, you're not allowing Naira to depreciate at such a level that a man on the street will abuse government and say, hey, what is happening to Naira? I mean, these are things that are done in central bank. So it is not just that central bank sits down and watches and then a government comes and runs down reserve. There are things you do to make sure that there is reserve accretion. If the economy is well conducted and many more investors come, of course, there are independent flow of dollar from outside the country into Nigeria, which was what happened in those days. When we dealt with our foreign debt in those days, you found out that international investors were coming, and then we were having FDI inflow, and then portfolio funds were coming. Because of stable macroeconomic environment, international investors saw it as a profitable business to come and do carry trade activities in Nigeria. What do I mean by that? They bring in cheap dollar from all over the world because interest rate regime in Nigeria is fairly more stable, and then the country risk by their perception was low. So when they price in the country risk and all of that, it was still possible for them to come into Nigeria and then invest in the capital market, or they invest in our portfolio, fixed income securities, and still make money. These were things that were happening. Unfortunately, when it then happened that the macroeconomy was not as stable as before, or based on their perception in the run-up to the election, they felt they didn't know what was going to happen. They then began to divest and send money out. So it is the interplay of all these economic activities that result in reserve accretion or reserve depletion.
You and your team were given credit for the implementation of the banking sector consolidation. It seems like light years ago when Nigeria had over 100 banks, well, had about 100 banks. How much has consolidation helped the banking sector?
Thank you very much. Consolidation has assisted a great deal in making Nigerian banks very strong and resilient. You recall, like you were saying, prior to 2005, when we had about 98 deposit money banks, all together they all had equity capital of less than 3 trillion naira when you sum up everything that they had. And yet, there were 98 of them with capital levels of between 2 billion and 10, 15 billion. And they were too small and too fragile to finance big ticket transactions. So much that in the upstream energy sector, only very few banks participated. Apart from helping to collect local naira, there was nothing happening between the Nigerian banks and the international oil companies. Not to talk of telecom sector and other sectors. They were just bystanders. So we came up and, under the leadership of Professor Soludo, that look, there is no way Nigerian banks can support the real sector meaningfully if they didn't have strong capital. And besides, they were too fragile to withstand shock, financial shock. And thank God we did what we did. Because post-consolidation, what happened? We then had 25 deposit money banks that had capital of multiples of all the banks. And what has happened today? Anytime there is a need to raise money in Nigeria, whether in energy sector, telecom sector, whatever, name it, Nigerian banks now participate very, very actively. Not just within Nigeria. Many of them have become African giants, and many of them now have branches all over the world. So much so that during 2008, 2009 financial crisis, all of them will have crumbled like a pack of cards, but for the fact that they ratcheted up their capital and they became very strong and resilient. We've seen the effect in the economic growth of Nigeria. Today, we have the biggest economy in Africa. We should thank Nigerian banks for catalyzing that speedy growth in our GDP, all because, of course, they were reformed and they had stronger capital.